Hi, welcome to Forbidden Planet TV, and today we have a very special guest with us on her publication day as well. We have CLYTEMNESTRA, Costanza Casati. How are you?
Hello. I'm feeling so overwhelmed right now. I'm really excited. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh my god, we're very excited to have you on publication day especially. So yes, and absolutely stunning book. I'm sure you're very pleased with your book, baby.
Yes, yes. I keep holding it everywhere I go.
Just on the tube, just like...
Kind of.
Yeah, fair enough.
Hopefully I don't look too weird doing that, but yes, it is a special moment, so I really want to cherish it.
Yes, yeah, it is stunning. It's such a beautiful book, and so, like, emotional and well written. We'll get there. Just to kind of start, really, so obviously Greek, Roman, a lot of mythology retellings are really having a moment right now, which is great to see. So what was your starting point for CLYTEMNESTRA?
So I became obsessed with this character, I think more than 10 years ago now. I grew up in Italy and I attended what we call a liceo classico, which is basically a high school where classics are compulsory. So you study ancient Greek and Latin for 5 years. And so I started studying classics when I was really young, like 14 years old. And then when I was about 16, 17, I became familiar with the character of CLYTEMNESTRA specifically, and I thought that she was the standout character from the Greek myth because she's a very ancient character but also quite a modern woman. She's someone who refuses to submit. She's someone who is unapologetic in the face of society's disapproval. She's a very striking character. But throughout the centuries, she's been vilified in the most horrible ways. She's been called monstrous. She's been cast as the archetype of the bad wife. And so I really wanted to kind of reclaim her story and her reputation. And I started working on this book 6 years ago now. Obviously now these retellings are trending, which is amazing, I think. It's such a powerful moment for this kind of book. But I knew I wanted to write a novel about a character who took part in the action. So it was not really about it was about reclaiming her reputation, but it wasn't about just discovering that she had a voice, because even in the ancient sources she's a very powerful character. So it was about showing readers how powerful she has always been.
Yes. And there's something very kind of even modern about her in the original kind of story. There's something that she feels almost out of time and out of place.
She really does. She's so modern. And, you know, when I was saying that she's kind of unapologetic and that she's very confident, that's something powerful for us, but it's even more powerful. And it was even more powerful in ancient Greece, more specifically the Greek heroic age, which is when the novel takes place, because the ancient Greeks had a very kind of, I don't really know how to explain this, but a very kind of collective morality and mindset. And the fact that she's well aware of other people's perceptions of her, but that she doesn't care, those perceptions do not affect her, is pretty incredible, I think.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And there is something about just one of the kind of early scenes that I was thinking of where Helen has gone and she goes to pray and then she doesn't have the kind of, I just don't have the patience to sit here and pray. So there's something, again, very modern, like that would feel like something I would do, that, you know. Yeah,
and it's not something, you know, I did not write her in a modern way because I wanted her to be like that. She has always been like that, even in the ancient sources. And she is kind of scandalous, she's powerful, kind of single-minded and confident. And it was quite, you were mentioning Helen. Helen was CLYTEMNESTRA's sister, twin sister according to some sources. And I really loved kind of playing with how different the two sisters are, because I feel that kind of historically they've always been portrayed in a way as if CLYTEMNESTRA was jealous of Helen, because Helen is obviously very famous in the myth. She's famous for her beauty, she's the woman who launched 1,000 ships, but these two women grew up in Sparta, and kind of the Spartan setting is a big part of the novel, and Sparta did not necessarily, the Spartan mindset did not necessarily value beauty, but rather they were more interested in strength. And so that dynamic between the two sisters is like a big part of the novel. Helen is more kind of obedient and just shy and jealous of Clytemnestra sometimes, whereas Clytemnestra is kind of the star of the show in a way.
Yeah, it's great to see, because I think there obviously has been a lot of focus on Helen in a lot of the books, so it's kind of great to see the other sister take stage. So, and so in this book, you obviously see her kind of from childhood, which I think kind of really helps to humanise her as well, to see her as a younger child. Where did kind of your research start for kind of that?
So I love doing research and I love talking about research. How long do you have? So there are two types of research that I did here and that I love to do in general with historical fiction. One is the more kind of cultural research. So I asked myself questions such as how did they perceive vengeance? Was vengeance the same thing as justice for them? Did they fear death? You know, that sort of thing. So that kind of the big questions. And then I wove those things into the narrative as seamlessly as I could, in a way that kind of felt clear to the readers, but also kind of fresh and entertaining. And then there is the practical kind of research, so all the tiny details. And I love to do that both before writing, but also in parallel with writing a scene. So whenever I have to write a scene, I just kind of think about all the things that I need. And when I feel like I've done enough research is when I kind of know exactly how the scene looks like and how the atmosphere was. And then I just start writing it. And in terms of sources, I did study the ancient Greek plays when I was younger. So I went back to them. More specifically, the Agamemnon by Aeschylus is like a big, my kind of big starting point. You could read this as an origin story of that play in a way. Also retelling, however you want to read it is fine. And but then also other tragedies by Euripides. Euripides actually writes incredibly clever women. So I think if you've never read like the Greek tragedies, he's the one to start with. So for instance, for Helen, I did study Helen by Euripides, the Trojan women, and then I kind of did a lot of research into kind of archaeological discoveries. So I was really interested in how the ancient Greek palaces were. They were kind of the idea that there were frescoes everywhere, so I did study a lot of the frescoes, and it is quite an interesting period because we don't really have a lot in terms of like archaeological evidence. It's not like, let's say, Pompeii, you know, where everything is perfectly preserved. But I would say I was more interested in how they lived specifically. And for the Spartan background, that was really important because Sparta was, women in Sparta had a kind of freedom that women everywhere else in ancient Greece could only dream of. So that was a big part of the novel as well, to show how that background affects Clytemnestra's character.
Yes, yeah. And you said before, obviously, this book was a few years in the making. So were you... Because you did a master's at Warwick University. Was it already kind of bubbling?
I had I had written a few scenes before before doing that master's, and then while I was doing my master's, there was a module that I was doing called, I think, fictional histories, something like that. And Sarah Moss was one of my tutors, and Tim Leach as well, who writes. He's just a wonderful author. And so I was like, okay, I'm doing my dissertation, because it was actually a piece of creative writing, but I'm doing my dissertation on Clytemnestra. And that's when I started properly writing the novel. But most of the main draft, I wrote it during the first lockdown, because that's when I actually had the time to work on it.
Yeah, I think some people were very productive during lockdown.
So many, especially authors. I feel like
No, we had some fantastic books coming out last year and this year. So definitely. The idea of kind of, again, the kind of modern character. Is there any kind of other kind of forceful, strong kind of women that you were kind of taking ideas from to form Clytemnestra?
For this novel, you mean? Not necessarily. I loved having like a cast of strong women in this novel specifically. So obviously from CLYTEMNESTRA to Helen, there is Leda, who is their mother, and Leda's quite an interesting woman in the myth because she has been portrayed countless times in art, and she's famous for being the woman who the god Zeus seduced in the form of a swan, but she's always portrayed in a very passive way. So it was quite interesting to kind of reclaim her reputation as well. Then obviously there are CLYTEMNESTRA's daughters, Iphigenia and Electra, and I had a lot of fun when I was writing kind of their relationship, because obviously it is quite tricky to write about Electra. Electra is the daughter who grows up to hate her own mother, so I really wanted to show how that dynamic is developed throughout the years. But in terms of women in the Greek myth, there are so many charming, courageous, defiant women. Think about Medea, think about Phaedra. And what I always find very funny is that these women, Clytemnestra, Medea, Phaedra, they became very famous in Greece during the classical period, which is when the main tragedies were written. But actually, and they're all like murderous, scandalous, kind of dangerous women. But actually, during the classical period, women could not go to the theater. They were kind of kept cloistered in the house. So only men could actually go out and enjoy this place. So I always think about kind of groups of men going to the theater and just enjoying this plays about women who murder their husbands and murder the children. And it just, I mean, at first glance, it doesn't really make any sense. But I think for them, it did make sense because they kind of describe these female characters as archetypes. So the archetype of the bad wife, of the bad mother. And so it was a way for them to kind of say, yes, we need to keep our women in the house because look what happens as soon as they have the power. So for them, these were kind of archetypes. But for us, these playwrights offer women who are, incredibly extraordinary and whom we root for because we do know, like, as a society that in history, emancipation often comes with like scandal and disobedience, and so I really like thinking about that. And the Greek myth is populated with incredibly powerful female characters, so I think if you want to kind of explore those stories, there are so many great retellings now. There's a retelling on Medea coming out, I think, by Natalie Haynes pretty soon. But yeah, it is no coincidence that so many female authors are now exploring these stories.
So and it's interesting obviously to touch on the importance of women, but also, I suppose, kind of going back to that the men still have the power and the control. So you obviously have kind of early on where Clytemnestra is kind of forced into a marriage. So yeah, it's interesting to see that kind of power dynamic and that power struggle. So yeah, it's just great that obviously you have the kind of women reclaiming their power and their position, but you can almost see kind of Clytemnestra like obviously fighting against that that male dominance.
And I love that you actually touched upon this because for me it was a big part. I really wanted to show the contrast between how she has grown up in a way and how she has learned to perceive herself as a free woman, not necessarily free, but as a strong woman, someone who is valued, who is judged in a kind of positive way by others, someone who's loved and respected, and then the contrast between that and also how she then is hated later on as she leaves Sparta, because obviously, and this is not something that applies to Clytemnestra only, it applies to all the sisters, Helen and Timandra, who is another kind of big character in the novel, Clytemnestra's younger sister. They all experience this shift in the way in which they're perceived as soon as they leave Sparta, and they do realize that kind of the word in the other ancient Greek cities do not necessarily respect women. So yes, the contrast between her perception of herself and the way other people perceive her was just something that I really wanted to explore.
Yes, yeah. And I think, I can't remember where I heard this the other day, it could have been on a myth panel, but they were saying obviously about men being the ones writing the history, so therefore it quite often, it will be skewed in that their favour, and then as it comes forward, you often just assume that's what happened, that's what that character was
absolutely
like.
And I think with men writing the myths, it is interesting specifically in relation to the myths because most for during most of the Greek heroic tradition kind of period, the myths were transmitted by oral tradition, and so they kept changing in a way, and so we have different versions of them. But the idea of like men writing the stories and this myth specifically, I think it casts women as either kind of like archetypes, or they just silence women in a way. So specifically within the Greek myth, you have the archetype of the good wife, Penelope, who is silenced in the myth. She's literally the first woman who is told to shut up by a man in the Western literary tradition. Like at the very beginning of the Odyssey, her son comes on stage and says, "Shut up." Well, I'm paraphrasing here. Yes. Obviously, that's not how the Odyssey goes, but something like that. And then you have the archetype of the bad wives, who's CLYTEMNESTRA. It's as if there's only two options for them.
Yes.
To be either kind of silenced or vilified.
Yes. And they can't just be a combination of all the great and wonderful things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we had to say we're doing a film version of this,
love this question.
Who would you have playing CLYTEMNESTRA?
Okay, so I have a list. No, I'm kidding.
You've got everyone cast.
No, I think Florence Pugh from The Wonder Little Women would be the perfect CLYTEMNESTRA. And I have like a whole list of actors and actresses for every single character. I think Emma Corrin would be a perfect Helen. I just like the idea of actresses who are both feminine and masculine at the same time, kind of play with those gender stereotypes, because it applies really well for women growing up in Sparta, I think. And also in art, CLYTEMNESTRA has always been portrayed in a very kind of masculine way. It's as if we don't have like a template for powerful women. We don't know how they look like, and so we just assume that they look like men in a way. So, but yeah, so Florence Pugh and Emma Corrin, and I'm just going to stop here because otherwise it's going to sound kind of creepy, me saying I want this actor and actress.
Yes, exactly. Just call me.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, Florence Pugh I think would be a great one.
Definitely. And if you had to kind of take another character to kind of focus on next, who would be another maybe kind of passed over character from...
Is that you asking me what I'm working on? Okay, well, I can't really talk about what I'm working on necessarily. I am writing another retelling, but I'm moving away from ancient Greece.
Okay.
So I'm leaving the Greek myth, not forever, hopefully. But if I had to pick another character from the Greek myth, I think I would definitely go with Phaedra, who is a very interesting heroine. She is the woman who she falsely accuses her stepson Hippolytus of rape when he refuses her advances, and then she commits suicide and tells everyone that it's his fault. And so this is like the thing she's known for, but she has an incredible backstory as well. She was the sister of Ariadne. Their relationship is actually well explored in Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, and she was forced to marry Theseus after Theseus kind of abandoned her own sister. So I feel like it would be one of those myths where it is interesting to bring all the different kind of strands together, because I really like this idea of writing stories that show how all the myths are connected, because most of the times we just study them separately and learn that but actually they were all connected. And so I think Phaedra's story would be very interesting. But that's not what I'm working on.
No. But hey, you never know. I always kind of think as well, with a lot of these retellings and stuff, you just think the therapy bill would be huge. This was like modern day.
Yes.
Family therapy couples. Like,
can you imagine CLYTEMNESTRA during a therapy session?
I was like, oh my god. But
it would be quite scary.
Yes, yeah. But it's kind of fun to think about, I
think. Absolutely.
So, to kind of finish off our little kind of snapshot for the day, so if you could recommend one underrated novel that you don't think gets the love it deserves, what would it be, and what's the most, like, one of the big books come out this year that you're most hyped for at this point?
You mean within Greek mythology or in general?
Or just, either, both.
Okay. I'm going to mention Lady Macbeth by Isabel Schuller. I'm doing an event with her actually in a few days. I just read her novel. I think it is glorious, and it is not a retelling, it's an origin story of the play Macbeth. And if you enjoyed Clytemnestra, I think you will really like Lady Macbeth. It has a lot of pace, it's very entertaining, the writing is gorgeous, and what I loved about it is that it doesn't really try to make the heroine likable. I think so many times we kind of try to make female characters likable, but she doesn't care about that, and in the end you root for her exactly because of that. So it's not a story about like female power and ambition, and I'm not sure that's really underrated, because it's out today. If I had to recommend another novel, I don't know, I think, well, definitely not underrated, but I also love God Killer.
Oh my god, we discussed that. Oh my god.
And I love that it's such an epic story, but told in just like 300 pages, I think. Maybe even less than that.
Yes.
I thought that was the most impressive part.
Yes.
Obviously, it's just the start of a trilogy, but yeah, those two books I think are my favorite debuts.
Yes.
From this year, at least. Yeah.
Plus, she's got her new tattoo as well, hasn't she? Hannah got a new tattoo, so she's
with Skinny.
Yes.
Amazing! I did see this. I did see this on social media.
It had to be done. So.
Yeah.
But
it's a great tattoo.
Yeah, so good. So you've got to get some petals tattooed next,
or maybe just a lioness somewhere, like a tiny little lioness.
Yes,
because she's always compared to the character is always compared to like the lions. Yeah,
of course.
That could be a great one.
I
have thought about it already.
Okay, well,
we'll
watch
see.
The space.
Yeah, watch the space.
Exactly. But thank you so much for joining us today and talking about your fantastic new book. Thank you. We look forward to welcoming you back soon.
Yes.
So
thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone out there. We will have signed copies on the website very soon, and in a lot of our stores, in fact probably all of them. So yes, hopefully see you soon with another interview. Bye.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.